Hi, and welcome to today's session on demystifying assessments and top tips for success. My name is Vicki Hallett, and I work in the Junior Talent Programs team at Bank of America. And I'm very pleased to be delivering this session with you all today. And I'm also joined by my colleague as well, Rianne, who I will let introduce herself.
Hello everyone and welcome to our session today. My name is Rianne Brown and I also support on the Junior Talent piece here at Bank of America and I cover our GCIB Junior Talent Recruiting, so welcome.
Super, thanks Rianne. So what are we going to cover today? The purpose of today is to give you all insight into some of the common activities and exercises which you could be asked to complete as part of a company's assessment process. We hope this offers you some further clarity and helps broaden your thinking around what you could be expected to do when applying for an internship or a graduate program in the future. It is important to note, though, that companies often do not have the same processes or exercises, so please do bear that in mind throughout today. We also will touch upon some key skills that we think are important for success. So the agenda in a bit more detail. We'll start with a quick exercise to get you thinking and in the right frame of mind for today's topic, before then going into more detail around the possible assessment activities and exercises. We'll also then share with you our top tips for success in these areas as well as we go through. We'll then move on to our skills session, which looks at how we can be successful in a virtual environment where we all find ourselves now. So to talk us through the next section on assessment and selection, I will now pass over to Rianne. Thanks.
Thanks, Vicki. So, as Vicki outlined, to get you thinking, we would like to give you a few minutes to consider a few answers to these questions below. So the first being, what activities and exercises do you think could be part of an application and selection process, considering both in-person and virtual activities? And secondly, what skills do you think companies are looking for in their junior talent? So I'll give you just 10 seconds to consider that, and then we'll revert shortly. Great. So hopefully that got you thinking essentially about some of the things that we're going to cover a bit further later on down the line in this presentation today. But just wanted to really have you thinking about virtual and in-person application processes and also what organizations are looking for in their junior talent. So moving into activities and exercises. So these are just a brief, I would say, outline of what to expect during the initial assessment and selection process. The first being an application form, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, followed by a CV and covering letter and/or motivational statement. You then may come across numerous online testing, which could include that of numerical, verbal reasoning tests, even gamification testing. Often they are competency-based as well. You could also come across video and phone interviews, particularly in this virtual environment, various group exercises, an individual presentation, case studies, role plays, often enough, and also an element of face-to-face or one-to-one interviewing. So CVs, just to go into a bit more detail here and have a bit of a focus on your CV. So really, a CV is a brief document that summarizes you as a candidate, and I would also add really represents your personal brand. Questions to consider here is, what common mistakes can you see? How can the CV be improved, and how can they make their CV stand out and showcase skills and experiences? So I'm just going to ping on to the next exercise here that relates to those questions. And again, I'll give you just 10 seconds here just to have a look at the CV, think about any mistakes, how the CV can be improved, and how this particular individual can make their CV stand out. So again, as I say, I'll give you a few seconds just to consider that. Great. So hopefully you came across a few answers to those questions earlier. I've highlighted just a few errors that we have identified that I'll just go through in a bit more detail. So the first being date of birth. Simply a date of birth is not required on a CV. I would say with personal profile here, more detail could be added. There could be a bit more detail regarding what this particular individual could bring, what skills they have, and have they completed any additional course which will aid them in their chosen career. It's a really good opportunity to, as I say, represent yourself as a strong candidate, and also really deliver your personal brand. Education as well. There's no particular dates on this CV, no institution that should be outlined. Skills, again, could provide us some more detail here. When we're thinking about experience, spelling, which, particular, I would say, line of business did they shadow during their time at Goldman Sachs? There's no dates included, and you would find probably from looking at the CV instantly, there's not a consistency in terms of formatting, which clearly needs to be improved to make it clear and concise and easy to follow. And finally, the interests here. As you can see, under interests, there is nothing, simply. So really, we want to make sure that your CV is filled to completion. So I'll just move on to what we would expect, I would say, from a CV. Using this as a bit of a template, I would say, just a good example of the same candidate CV, but it gives a clearer representation of the individual. So you can see it's easy to follow and read. They are very clear about the dates, so it's easy to see what they've been doing, and they have added some really good detail. Again, this is just an example, but the layout of your CV, again, making sure the formatting is right, as you can see here, and also there's some consistency. Great. So I'll move on to our top tips then for CVs. So these are just a few that we feel is key here. So when we're thinking about, as I mentioned previously, formatting and spelling, really, if you can, get another pair of eyes to check and help spot for errors. There may often be times that you may miss errors. I've done it so far in my career, I would say, on an email, where it's good to just get another pair of eyes to triple check your work. Ease of reading, keep to bullets and key headings if you can. Make sure that you are constantly tailoring your CV to the role that you're applying for. List your most recent experience and education first. Call out any transferable skills, whether that be work experience, societies, or hobbies. And keep up to date, refresh for each application. You know, your CV is really an ever-evolving representation of yourself, so make sure that you are refreshing for each application. Only include experience and skills that you can clearly give examples to. You know, don't blag it. Simply, what you want to do is feel confident in an interview context to speak through your experience and skills represented on your CV. And finally, what makes you different to any other applicant? Make sure that you showcase this. And again, thinking a bit more broadly about your experiences, thinking about your volunteering experience or the society that you've joined at university, it could really help add character to your CV. Okay, so moving on to the next section then, really focused on the covering letter and motivational statements. So as I'm sure you know, covering letters help you stand out to potential employers. It's really a document to add to your CV, and it identifies and highlights your knowledge and skills and how they make you the best candidate for the role. It really helps make an impactful first impression. When we're thinking about the key aims of a covering letter, I would say the top three is certainly to introduce you to the potential employer as a strong candidate. It's to include your reasons the employer should consider you for the particular position that you're applying for, and leave the employer with a positive and memorable first impression of you as a candidate. Okay, so a few top tips here. Address your letter professionally. Express your interest in a clear and concise way. Describe your specific knowledge and skills for the role. End your letter with a call of action. Include a signature line if you can, and proofread and check for length. Again, if you can get a friend to check your work for you, or just simply have a look and a brief read, it's always helpful before submitting your covering letter to any application. So secondly, then, we'll move into the motivational statements. So really, motivational statements are designed to find out how much you know about the role and why you are applying for it. So for example, it could be what is about the role and or the company that motivates you to apply. Often further example questions here are what motivates you, what are you passionate about, what challenges are you looking for, and in essence, they are all asking one overall question. Why do you want to work for us? So I would say, why do employers ask motivational statements? What do they get out of it, right? What do they get out of testing you in this way? Well, really, it is competency-based questions that test your ability to do the job. These are designed to find out how much you actually know about the role and what will push you to succeed in it once you get there. So it's all about the journey. It will show if you have researched the position and the company properly, while also indicating how you will perform. If you're motivated by working in a team, for example, on creative projects, but the job you're applying for requires working independently and processing lots of data, that perhaps isn't a good sign that you'll be the best match for the role. So how to answer motivational questions? So at first, motivational questions can appear very vague, but you can break down your answer and impress following these clear guidelines. So the first being to make it personal. Make sure the answer is about you. Just like answering competency questions, your answer is always stronger when there is evidence included or examples included. So for example, again, instead of saying, I like working in a team, try, I really enjoy my group project at university and was really motivated by the exchange of ideas and creativity, using input from everyone to find the best solution. Secondly, link your answer to the employer. So these questions are definitely not a cut and paste job at all. You need to show your knowledge of the role and also the company you are applying to. What motivates you for one position might not suit you for the next. So take the opportunity to develop and demonstrate that you are fully aware of what the job involves and also that you are a good fit for the company, and further develop your knowledge on the company as well. For example, if you've read about a recent deal at B of A, mention how that relates to the career path you want to pursue. And thirdly, align your motivation with the company. So the employer will want to know where they fit in with your career progression and goals. If they ask what you're passionate about, explain how your passion could take you far in the company and lines up with their aims, their values as an organization. Do you know B of A's values, for example? Do you feel connected to our ESG or CSR strategy? You know, these are all key things that will help you when answering motivational questions, and will really make sure that your answers are, you know, informed, compelling, and that they really illustrate how you would fit in as part of their team. So I'll hand over to my colleague Vicki here to walk through presentations and group activities.
Great, thanks, Rianne, for that. So as Rianne mentioned, we now want to share with you more information on other possible exercises that you may be required to undertake as part of a company's assessment process. So namely presentations and group exercises, which could both now be virtual or in person. So we've considered both in what we're going to discuss here. So firstly, with individual presentations, this is where you may be given a scenario or a case study to read and research and then present it back to the assessor. The key elements, as we've written there, that we think employers are looking for here include communication skills, business acumen, and enthusiasm. Sometimes presentation materials and topics could be given to you to prepare in advance. Other times the materials will be provided to you on the day, and then you perhaps maybe have 10 minutes to prepare, for example. So our top tips for presentations would be to think about your message. Know exactly what it is your audience you want them to know by the end of the presentation? What's the overall big picture you're trying to convey? You can then add in the details around this. Also think of your audience in terms of tailoring the presentation in order to keep them engaged and make sure that they understand your message fully at the end. For example, there's no need to explain the basics of a topic if you're presenting to experts in the field. So consider who you are speaking to and their level of knowledge and expertise in the subject matter. And this should all be included in the presentation brief. Give an introduction with an agenda. This will help you engage with the audience early on and make sure that the presentation remains focused to the brief that you've been given. It'll also help you stay on track with your thoughts throughout the presentation as well. We suggest having a set of bullet points to refer to rather than reading off a full script the whole time. Or even better is to just have a few main points which you can memorize and then build on them in a natural way during the conversation with your audience. This will be more meaningful and authentic as well. So if you're nervous, it may seem easier to write a whole script down, but sometimes this can cause more anxiety if you miss a specific word or a sentence. You could lose your place in the script, and that might then completely throw you off your presentation. If you're given the presentation brief before your assessment day, do have the pre-prepared material ready, like a PowerPoint slideshow, if that's what they're asking for. Remember that the pre-prepared material and slides are meant to enhance your presentation and what you're saying, not replace it. So keep the slides to a minimum, keep them neat, concise, use color and images versus large blocks of text. As we all know, a picture says 1,000 words and is a lot interesting to look at. So you can build on your slides with what you're saying. Again, if you have time to prepare beforehand, practice with friends or even film yourself and watch it back. The more preparation, the better. Also, a key one, when giving the presentation, remember to slow down. I can guarantee that you are always going faster than you think you are. This is always one that I try and remember as well. Eye contact and body language overall is really important as a way of connecting with your audience and not losing their attention. So extremely important for both in-person and virtual presentations. So think about your positioning, particularly if you are virtual and you prefer to stand up when giving a presentation, as that becomes more natural to you. But can the audience see you? Is the camera in the right angle, for example? Timing is a really big one in terms of presentations and any exercises you're given, really. Make sure that your presentation fits into your allocated time that you've been given. Always refer back to the brief. So perhaps use a stopwatch or your phone to ensure that you remain on time. Do try to wrap up with a brief conclusion. It doesn't need to be very long, just a quick sum up of what you've just talked about to close off your presentation. You may want to offer Q&A at the end if it's in the brief. This is a great chance to engage with your audience again and for them to see how you perform with live questions and how well you've understood what you've just presented. Do be honest. Don't worry if you don't know the answer. You could always say, I will check and come back to you, for example. Not everyone always has the answers, and we often do this in real life as well. So moving now on to group exercises. Again, here you might be given a scenario or a case study to discuss and debate as a group and reach a conclusion within the allocated time. Key elements here on screen you can see on the slide that assessors could be looking for include communication skills, again, teamwork, active listening skills, and timing. Usually these exercises are restricted to about 10 minutes, so it's important to work together and also work fast. So some top tips here would be, again, keep to time. You may wish to volunteer to be the timekeeper because it's an important role. So it's really important that as a group, you complete the discussion in the allotted time and reach your conclusion. If it's in person, sometimes assessors will only hand out fewer information sheets than candidates in the room as a way to, as a chance to show subtle communication, negotiation, and potentially delivery skills among candidates. So you may want to offer to read out the brief to the group if you have the opportunity. Remember the names of people in your group and address them accordingly. Using names confidently and correctly when speaking will look impressive, It's also a really good way to build rapport with others, particularly in a virtual session when sometimes it's difficult to know who you're talking to when you're looking at the camera. As mentioned with presentations, eye contact and body language is crucial. Try to listen with your eyes and your hands, nod at the right time, smile, show enthusiasm about others' contribution, and perhaps even use these types of actions to bring others into the group conversation if they're being a bit quieter. Remember, it's a team exercise. You don't need to shout the loudest to be noticed. Assessors are looking for those team players and how you collaborate, work with others. So do be confident and contribute to the discussion, but don't be overbearing or interrupt others or be dismissive of their ideas, even if you don't agree. And lastly, for our tips for the group exercise would be make sure that you always refer back to the brief and follow the instructions. As a group, it's often quite easy to be derailed when you're exploring different themes and ideas together. So moving on, given the virtual world we now find ourselves in, we wanted to touch upon video and phone interviews and how to excel here. There are different interview styles, which Rhiannon will speak to in a moment. However, in general, as it's noted here, the purpose of any interview, whether phone, video, face-to-face, in person, is for a company to get to know more about you and see how you would fit into the role in their company. We've also listed some key elements on the slide for which skills we think assessors are looking for in interviews. So do take note of those. Before we go into the different styles, we wanted to share some top tips for success in these areas. Most of these on screen apply to both video and phone interviews. However, some may be more applicable to one more than the other. We won't go through them all, as some are quite obvious, but just wanted to touch on a few. So pick a suitable location. This is really important. Of course, avoid noisy public areas and instead opt for a quiet, private location in your home. If you live with friends and family, do warn them in advance that you're having a call or an interview so that you do need some peace and quiet if they're able to accommodate. And minimize the background noise by closing windows, turn off any TVs and radios, of course, and also a key one to turn off any electronic devices like Alexas or Google Home. And sometimes mine randomly talks to me in the middle of presentations, so you want to avoid that happening. For video interviews in particular, make sure the room that you choose is tidy and clean and it's quite a minimal background so that the interviewer focuses on you versus what's in the background of your screen. So dressing to impress, even for the phone interviews, as it notes here, which may sound strange as the interviewer can't necessarily see you, but dressing for an interview will put you in a professional mindset and will really help to boost your confidence. And you shouldn't treat a telephone interview any differently to a video or an in-person one, and you surely wouldn't turn up to meet a potential employer in your sports clothes or pajamas. So dress to impress on all occasions. Standing up and smiling really helps. So if you smile, even when you're on the phone, you'll ensure that the interviewer hears your enthusiasm from the start. On a phone interview, you may prefer to take the call standing, which might give you an energy boost and a bit more confidence. But of course, for a video interview, this would be a bit different as you want to ensure eye contact the whole time, so you'll no doubt be sitting at a table looking at your screen. Refer to your notes sparingly. So again, a bit like we talked about with presentations, you might want to have notes to hand that you've made. And one of the great advantages of being on the telephone is that you could have them to the side and your interviewer will not see. But don't rely on them too heavily, as the interviewer may hear you rustling papers and will be able to tell if you're reciting answers from pre-prepared materials. If you would prefer to have some notes, we suggest again to have concise bullet points as sort of a prompt versus having a script. This will keep, again, the interview style quite conversational and natural. Of course, with video interviews, you won't be able to refer to notes as often because, again, you want to keep that eye contact on the screen. In a similar vein, take notes if you're comfortable about multitasking and jotting down some useful information that could be helpful if you have a second interview that you want to remember. But again, you don't want to appear disinterested if you're looking away from the screen too much, frantically writing things down and missing the conversation or the next question. So do think about those things carefully if you would like to try them. Video specific in terms of body language. Again, interviewers will be looking for you to make good eye contact, smile, listen, nod at the right time, generally appear interested in what they're saying. So to help you do this, make sure that your camera is at eye level and you should be looking at the camera versus the person on the screen. Avoid slouching, things like that, moving around too much, touching your clothes, your hair, etc., which sometimes is quite common if you're nervous, but do try and limit your moving around as much as possible. And at the bottom, we've mentioned about getting technical as well. So what we mean by this is suggest a few days before the interview, test your computer, your camera, any software you've been asked to download beforehand. Make sure that the picture is clear and the sound quality is good. Obviously on the day, make sure everything's fully charged and plugged in, as you don't want the battery to run out in the middle of your interview. If there are any technical glitches, for example, you can't hear your interviewer on the video interview, don't struggle through, as you obviously want to make your best performance. So mention the problem, it might be easily fixed, or you might need to just dial back in again. But don't be afraid to ask those questions. So that's for video and phone interviews. So I'd now like to pass over to Rianne to share a bit more on the different interview styles with us.
Thank you, Vicki. Great. Okay, so moving into the interview styles. So I'll go through the first, which is probably the most common that you've come across, but the competency interview. So really, competency interviews focus on the alignment between your skills and knowledge and what is required for the role. Typically, the questions or style of questions does focus on experience and are based around scenarios, so the assessor can better understand how you'd behave in a certain situation. So some examples of these questions could be, can you describe a time where you've worked well as part of a team to deliver a project? What was your role? What challenges did you overcome? And secondly, can you describe a time you have dealt with conflict? What was a scenario? What did you learn? And what was the outcome? So you can already see, based on experience, they're trying to understand in just further detail how you would react in certain situations. So technical interviews are focused on your specific skills. So they really are ensuring that you are the right match for the role. So for example, if a role requires a particular programming language like Java, do you have this skill? Can you excel in these interviews by reading the job description to further understand what skills are required, and ensuring you are able to show that you have these desired skills and knowledge using examples. Often also technical interviews may require some form of assessment, for example, a coding test or a modeling test. So just to give you a flavor of what to expect regarding technical interviews. Thirdly, we have our values-based interviewing. So our values-based interviews are interviews which focus on checking your values match those of the company. So similar to what we mentioned before, do you understand or have you researched regarding an organization's value statements and really culturally what they stand for? So ensure to do your research on the company and make sure that in some ways, your values align or in some ways align with theirs or vice versa. Consider a strong answer to questions such as, how do you feel you align with our firm's value statements? Other than just, they match my values, I just do. You want to make sure that there is a concrete answer that really covers off, why you would be interested in that organization from a cultural value statement perspective. So moving into our strengths-based interviews. So strengths-based interviews are really interviews that are becoming increasingly popular with companies, but it can be quite tricky. So essentially they are designed to better understand what you see as your strengths. So for example, what you're good at, therefore what kind of role or type of role would you best be suited for. They are very difficult to plan for in advance, and these are the type of questions whereby often they are based on, or the way in which we evaluate candidates is all based on potential. So here are some top tips on how to navigate the strengths-based interviewing. So look at the desired strengths and skills listed in the job description that you've applied for. Can you align your own strengths to them? Secondly, really think and consider what your strengths are. During an interview, it's better to focus on your genuine talents instead of what you think you're good at or what you think the company may be looking for. Strengths interviews do not require you to use examples to back up your strengths. However, you would certainly in some ways draw on past experiences and use relevant examples to add value to your responses. Some example questions that you may come across with strengths-based interviewing could be, do you think this role would play into your strengths and why? How do you stay motivated? What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing the least? And describe a successful day and what made it successful. So you can see the tone is all thinking about potential when we're assessing strengths-based or assessing candidates via strengths-based interviewing. So moving into our next session, and hopefully this will just give you a further, flavour into really the key competencies that we are looking for as part of the assessment and selection process. So you can already see I've outlined a few on the screen here, covering that of leadership, teamwork, problem solving and analytical skills, and a client or customer focus. I would like to just take a moment to pull out one in particular, which is really focused on communication and professional presence. So this is so important in the virtual world we now find ourselves in. Your body and tone of even voice on the phone or via a video interview is certainly something that you want to be aware of. This is also particularly important when networking, whether it be in person or virtually. Remember to introduce yourself. Where are you and what are you studying before going in directly to the conversation. Consider it as your 10-second elevator pitch, which is a great way to build a rapport with others in the room. So I'll now hand over back to my colleague Vicki to walk you through our top communication tips.
Great, thanks Rhiannon for that. And as Rhiannon just mentioned, communication and professional presence is key, particularly for the virtual world, which can be more challenging. So we wanted to share these top tips with you to consider. So we'll just run through a few relatively quickly. So being simple, but breathing, taking a deep breath before you start can transform your speech and settle your nerves and help you remain composed throughout the conversation. Being coherent, so speaking slowly and to the point. Try to be as concise as possible and avoid going off topic. Thinking about the structure of what you say can help, although appreciate that's difficult when you have a short time to respond, for example, in an interview question. Owning your digital space, so sit up, look interested, positive, use those hand gestures we were talking about for emphasis in what you're saying. Eye contact, as we've mentioned a few times, is extremely important across all exercises. And speaking with style, so being sort of passionate and confident in what you're saying will make your answers stand out to the person that you're speaking to. Slow down and pause. As we've said, you're often going quicker than you think you are, and when you deliberately slow down, it shows you have confidence in what you're talking about. Being the audience that you wish you had. What we mean by this is you are often communicating when you're not technically speaking or presenting. So again, trying to nod at the right time, smile, use hand gestures in an encouraging way. And then hopefully others will do the same to you as well. Don't assume an idea is obvious. So take the time to explain the concepts, even if you think they are quite obvious to yourself. Again, thinking about your audience, which we talked about earlier. Start and end strong. So people will often remember how you start and end the speech. So make sure it's quite impactful. You don't want the first thing to for someone to hear is, can you hear me? Am I on mute, etc., which I'm sure we've all said quite a number of times over the last few months being in the virtual world. So you want to start and end strong. So do keep these in mind during any exercise or activity we've talked about so far in an assessment process and in general networking events as well that Rhiannon mentioned will come in handy, whether these events are part of your university or a company networking event. So hopefully that section has given you a few things to think about ahead of any assessments that you may have in the future. We'd now like to move on to offering some advice about how to be successful in a virtual environment. And no doubt over the last 7 months or so, we've all learnt things we do particularly well, and perhaps things we need to improve upon when working or studying at home. I've definitely learned I need to move around more, otherwise my Fitbit gets very angry and starts beeping because I haven't left my apartment all day. So there are some people who are very successful at working and studying remotely, and others who find it a struggle. So do take the time to do some self-reflection to consider your experiences so far this year. For example, what have you found easy, and what have you found more challenging in the virtual world? Often what we find easy and difficult is linked to what is in our control and what isn't. Having said that, there is a lot that is in our control that can make working and studying virtually more effective, so best to focus on these things. And in this section, we're going to look at 3 areas: your space, your work, and your health. So this slide aims to share how best to set up your home working or study area for success, thinking about being comfortable and also what's best for productivity. So a few suggestions there on screen include ensuring you have adequate Wi-Fi and working technology that you need in order to be successful. So making sure everything is charged each day and having a stable internet connection, turning off any distractions in the background will often help as well. Create an ergonomic workspace. What we mean by this is, as we may spend hours each day working or studying at our computer, it's really important to ensure our space is set up correctly for our health. Now, we may need to be creative here depending on your home office setup, but try to consider the height and the positioning of things like your chair, your computer, your keyboard if you have one, to be in the best for your posture. My flatmate, for example, prefers to stand each day while working, so has balanced her laptop on a couple of books and box files to make sure that it's the correct height. So have a think about what could work for you in your current home environment. Try to set up a space that is private and free from distractions as well. I often get sidetracked by my dog, who likes to come and sit with me, but so sometimes I have to move rooms when I want to, really concentrate and focus, especially when presenting, for example, or on a video meeting. If you live with friends and family, do you work in the same room? Would it be more productive if you worked in a separate, quieter room, for example? Again, this will all depend on your home environment, but try to be creative where you can so you can keep the focus and concentrate throughout the day. An expert tip there we've added to leave your mobile phone in another room to avoid being distracted by social media. I'm sure we can all honestly admit that sometimes we stroll through our Instagram and our Facebook news feeds various times during the day, and that will pull our focus from our work tasks that we need to be getting on with. So having it in another room immediately removes that temptation. So now that our space is ready, we can think about the type of work and study that we need to do. So being communicative, accessible, and responsive, as it's written there. So at university or in an office, you're usually physically closer to others, so it's much easier to communicate, get your questions answered, brainstorm ideas. One of the biggest challenges about being virtual and working remotely is the ability to connect with those that you need to. For example, trying to reach your teammate for a question who you usually sit next to, and it's an easy conversation, but now they won't answer your email or your call. So what's in your control here? You personally can be responsive. So replying to emails in a timely manner, answering calls or calling someone back promptly if you've missed them. Some companies use instant messaging like Skype, which is a quick and easy way to connect with your colleagues. Your manager can help give you guidance on this as well and throughout any internship or graduate programs. And at university, perhaps your tutors and professors can help with guidance on that as well. In general, we all need to be more proactive, more deliberate, and make more of an effort to keep our networks, both professional and personal, alive in a virtual environment. So do think about your different communication options. Actively participate in meetings. Being present and actively participating is really important. It's all too easy to try and multitask, and I admit I sometimes do this and do need to stop as it's not very effective. For example, being on a conference call, but also checking your emails at the same time, so you're only half listening. Do try to focus on that one meeting that you're in, and you'll likely make a bigger impression in this way too with the others that are in that meeting. Lastly, do try and be productive each day. You want to accomplish those tasks that you set out to achieve. So we would suggest getting a clear picture with the help of your manager or your tutor at university. What are your priorities for that day? It's very easy to get sidetracked and feel like you haven't ticked anything off your list. So being quite methodical and having lists and being organized will help here. Another expert tip here is about taking cues from your colleagues and your managers of whether to turn on your webcam if you have one in meetings. So we would suggest each day getting ready to show up on screen so you're not caught out in your sports clothes. And then lastly, we wanted to touch on your health and why this is important in the virtual world. When in an office or at university, there's some degree of physical activity naturally built into your day, whether that's walking to and from meetings or lectures, coffee breaks, going to lunch, going to see your colleague that sits across the floor, all very natural. At your home office, you need to be more deliberate. So let's look at a few suggestions on how we can develop and maintain a routine that can help keep your body and mind active and healthy. So set a routine. So set your start and end times, your breaks, your lunch. For example, start at 9 a.m., have a coffee break at 10:30, lunch at 1 with a quick walk, log off at 6. It's very easy to wake up and roll out of bed, start work 5 minutes later, and then stay there all day and potentially into the evening, which of course we don't want to happen. So scheduling will really help build that structure into your day to try and separate that work life and home life, even though you're in the same space. So building time to stretch, take a walk, get some vitamin D, find ways to move throughout the day, whether that's a walk or a gym class at lunch or a walk around your flat while you're on a call, which doesn't require you to be at your computer. This also helps with your focus and what we talked about being present in that one meeting. So you won't be sidetracked by your emails if you're walking around, your flat while on the call. I do this sometimes when I'm on a call that doesn't require me to look at a screen. I often walk around my balcony to get that well-needed fresh air and helps me focus on the call as well. So do consider this every day. What are your opportunities to move, to stretch, to get outside? And thirdly, we suggest setting aside maybe 5-10 minutes a day to practice mindfulness. If you're not familiar with mindfulness, it's essentially a mental state that you can achieve by focusing on the present moment whilst calmly acknowledging and accepting your feelings, thoughts, and body. It is used as a therapeutic technique and stress relief. There are a lot of resources online that you might have seen already. There's various apps, for example. I'd recommend you really try out if you haven't before. Working and studying online or remotely is very intense. And so it's crucial for us to set aside time to look after ourselves, both mentally and physically. And mindfulness could be a way to do this. So do have a go and see how it could help you. And with that does bring us to the end of today's session. It's been really great to have this opportunity to share these topics with you. We do hope that you found today helpful. If you'd like to keep in touch and stay up to date with all the Bank of America news, please do visit our LinkedIn page and Twitter handle that's now on this slide. And also shown here is our junior talent email address in case you'd like to get in touch directly. We thank you again for your time. It's been really great to connect and wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks very much.